lasting impact. And today I have my special guest. Please name one of 2025 top 20 global gurus for leadership, along with Simon Sinek and John Maxwell. Leadership and business advisor, no other than Lee Weber.
Thank you, Dan. I'm happy to be with you today.
Welcome, Miss Lee on Entrepreneurship 101. And can you please introduce more about yourself as that
Sure. So I also am an entrepreneur. I started my company actually 34 years ago this year. And what I do is I primarily do three things. Number one is I work with executives, I work with business owners, I work with boards of directors on strategic planning. So I help them identify where do they need to take their company or their organization over the next 3, 5, 10 or more years to be successful. And I help them create very concise but clear and actionable strategic plans. As part of those conversations of where this organization needs to go, we invariably start talking about, well, who's going to do that work? Who's going to lead this company? Who's going to be in the different supporting roles? So we have conversations around workforce planning and succession planning. So I do a lot of that type of work with my clients as well. And then the third thing that I do is I provide a lot of one-on-one or a lot of group one-to-group coaching and training to basically help the leadership team or the ownership team implement the plans that they've created and create the companies and organizations that they want. So we do a lot of strategy conversations. We have a lot of conversations around dealing with individual employees or different teams or different divisions, and identify ways to help the leadership team, the ownership team, move the needle in the right direction so they get the impact, the positive impact on performance, profits, and the workplace culture.
And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Miss Elise. Thank you, and congratulations for your award. So today, let's talk about your family business really ready for the next generation. You often cite the statistic that only 3% of a family business survive to the fourth generation. When you work in the family business, what do you see in 97% that are doomed? What was the 3% do differently from day one?
Well, the reason that I've seen a number of family businesses not be able to pass on their business to the second generation or third generation or on from there is typically it happens with a founder-led business. So the person who started the business, and it's still stereotypically the dad or the man. And that individual doesn't know how to let go so that the next leaders, whether they're family members or even some outside members, can take the business to the next level or into the next generation of where it needs to go given changes around customer needs, industry needs, regulatory needs, climate needs, whatever it is. And the founder has a tendency, for the best of intentions, to limit growth, to limit the development of other team members, to control decision making too closely. So they limit their company's ability to scale and for their team, particularly their leadership team, to develop the leadership skills that are needed to take the company to the next level.
Very well said, Miss Elise. So you make a powerful distinction. Succession planning is not about family, it's about fit. How do you tell a founder that their beloved child might be not the right person to lead and
Well, you froze up a little bit there, but I believe the question was how do I communicate to the owner of a family business that a child may not be the right person for the position. So one of the things that I make very, very clear to my family business clients on day one is I want them to be very clear that when I work with them, my client is the business. It's not dad, it's not mom, it's not the son or the daughter or the family. My client is their business. And so I look at who has the skill sets that this business needs to get to the next level. And so it may not be the firstborn son or the firstborn daughter. It may be the niece or somebody else in the business in the family line that has the skill sets that are needed for the particular position that we're talking about. And so I made that distinction and that line of sight very, very clear for two reasons. Number one, it's better for the business if we have individuals with the right skill sets and the right personality in the right positions. We're going to have a much more effective position fulfillment there. But it's also better for the person. Daniel, I don't know about you, but I've had jobs years ago where I didn't like the work. And it's an awful thing to wake up and go, "Ugh, I have to go do that again." And it's crippling, and it's a prison for a family member if they are basically forced into a position that they're not well suited for, but they have this overwhelming obligation of family duty to keep this business alive. It's not fair to them. They're not happy, and their stress level, their health, and the performance of the business suffers because of it.
Very well said. Ms. Lee's, many family business owners avoid succession planning entirely because it feels like planning of their own irrelevance or death. How do you refrain the conversation to be about legacy rather than loss?
Well, before we get to the notion of succession planning helps with legacy versus loss, it's don't even think about succession planning as planning for when you die or when you're no longer here. Let's look at succession planning as when you go on vacation, who's going to take care of things so when you actually go on vacation, you actually can rest. And I will tell you, Daniel, a number of years ago, that exact type of scenario was the challenge that I posed to one of my family business clients. It was obviously a family run firm. Mom and dad owned the business. Two sons were their senior managers, and their heir is a parent. And the challenge that I put to them was, because let me back up. The ultimate goal obviously was to initially, within 2 years, get dad to a point where he could actually go on vacation and not call into the office several times a day. That was the goal for 2 years out, is what he wanted. And I said, when was the last time you went on vacation? He said, well, we go every year, but I'm talking with the office every day. And so I said, the challenge we're going to have is we're going to bump this up. So by the end of this year, you're going to go on a cruise, and you're not going to be able to call the office every all week long. Now they can reach you if there's an emergency, but you are not going to be allowed to call them to check in. And the reason that I did that is, in order to think about it, just be gone for 7 days and not have the office call you every day or you call them every day requires that you do so many of the same things that you need to do for a succession plan to ensure that when you are gone 100%, someone can cover for you. So we spent a year of, first off, getting their heads around the idea of, why are you doing this versus the person who actually has the position that should be doing it? That's typically a big step. Number one is helping the founder and the leader of the business, of the family, quite often, to identify that quite often he or she is still doing things they did 30 years ago when they started the business that should no longer be with them. It should be with someone that has a position title that is appropriate for that particular task. So we spend a lot of time within the first year just cleaning up what are tasks and responsibilities that should be repositioned with the proper position and away from the founder or the owners or some of the family members. The second thing that we do then is once we start repositioning these tasks, is actually then teaching the people that now have these newfound responsibilities how to do them to a degree that the previous person or the founder no longer has a panic attack and micromanages them. So we have to build trust in their abilities to do the jobs that they're being paid to do. And then the third thing that we have to work on in this first year is also ensuring that the founder and the team now that has the somewhat cleaned up job responsibilities understand what their job is now that it's been cleaned up, how to do it. And that in and of itself is a big job. But then let's just throw in the additional item now of when team members, not even the founder, but when team members go on vacation throughout the course of the week with their cleaned up job responsibilities, who's going to backfill and help cover for them while they're gone? Because we also want to minimize the number of times when a customer calls in and I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Daniel's on vacation this week. He'll call you back next week and then he can help you then." I don't want a customer to have to wait a week for information. I can say, "I'm sorry, Daniel's not here this week, but let me look into that and get that answer for you." There should be a way to keep information and product and movement happening while the primary position holder is out of the office. That's all part of succession planning, is building those skills and building depth. And that can happen in much shorter time frames. So I typically have my clients start succession planning by basically doing vacation planning and vacation coverage planning.
Interesting, Miss Lee's an empowering answer as well. You say family business is to face special challenges when it comes to talk about position changes and leadership transitions. What is the single most difficult conversation ever facilitated between a founder and their successor?
Mm. Um, I think that the challenge, I'm trying to think about how I can share this without sharing too much information. It wasn't, it's not a surprise. It was a situation where one of the children was of the mindset that they would be taking over as the CEO. Um, and that had been a long-standing assumption in the family. And what happened, and it goes back to what I was alluding to earlier, even though in the leadership team and in the family meetings that I would lead, I was regularly saying to them, as I've shared with you and your listeners, we look at what the company needs and the skill sets of the people in the positions that the company needs. And that's who you should look to move in those positions versus a particular family member. And even though that had been said a number of times, there still was an assumption that this one child would be the heir apparent. And so the father and mother had to have a conversation with one of the children who assumed that they would be the heir apparent. They were not going to be the heir apparent. That the another child was going to be the heir apparent. And the reason I'm sharing this is it wasn't a difficult conversation in the end, because the child who thought that she was going to be the heir apparent was actually relieved. And it also goes back to what I said before. The parents were getting themselves emotionally worked up because they didn't want to disappoint her and name their second child, which was a son, and they didn't want their daughter thinking that she was being usurped because she was a woman and he was a man. They had different skill sets, they had different personalities. And so that fear was very challenging for the parents to face and to figure out how to have that conversation with the daughter. Long story short, as I said, she was actually relieved because she didn't want the position, but she had never anticipated that her parents would be afraid that it would come across as possibly offending her, because so many family members had assumed that she would be taking over.
Thank you for sharing that story, Miss Lees. What's the difference between a family business that's just ready on paper with documents and plans and one that's truly ready in practice? What is the tangible or intangible that separate them?
Hmm. Well, I would believe that the difference is in what is actually being done. Um, I will say in full transparency, I've never had a situation where I've had a family business that has everything documented well and is not performing well versus one that's not documented well and performing well. If they're documented well, they're typically not, may not be great performers, but they're typically following the procedures if they've gone through the effort to do all that. Um, but it goes to the consistency in the behaviors that are demonstrated, and it goes to how focused they are on running an efficient business and communicating as a business versus communicating as family members and running as a family business. And there's a difference. So, quite often, the ones that are more successful are the ones that are focused on running a business that will benefit the family versus running a family run business.
Miss Liz, you talk about the importance of role clarity. In a family business, roles blur constantly. How do you help family separate dad at the dinner table from the CEO in the boardroom?
Well, that's a really good question, and it depends upon the family. I've had some family business clients where at work, they do not call dad, dad, and mom, mom. They will call them by their first names, Roger and Carol, whatever. Um, I've had others who call them mom and dad, but typically what has worked for my clients is one of the things that I've done that has been helpful for them that they've conveyed to me is we've had the conversations, and I've alluded to it here a number of times. We are working on what is best for the business that benefits the family in the long run. And I say that because one of the conversations, and I just had this earlier this year with another family business client who I've been working with for a number of years, but they are now in a situation where their second generation is within the next 5 years going to be of age where they are going to be able to move into some potential leadership roles within the company. And so I've really started having conversations with them of what do you really want to do with this company now? How many generations do you want this business to support? How long do you think you want this company to be around? Because that starts giving us some idea of scale, of size, of roles and responsibilities that we need to build this business to be able to support. And also, how much how important is it for you to be that family members are going to be active in the business versus just benefiting from the business? So we have those conversations, and I say that because having that understanding clarifies roles and responsibilities and transitioning roles and responsibilities. So it's again, going back to what you had asked earlier, what are we trying to build with this business? Is it a legacy business that is going to be around for multiple generations? Or are we looking for something that we want to be around for a number of generations and we want family members to be actively involved? Or are we just simply looking for, or not simply, or are we also looking, another client, are we looking to create this business to have multiple tangent businesses that will give opportunities of different types of leadership and business roles for different types of family members as we grow. So there's a number of different things to look at when we're talking about roles and responsibilities and succession within a family business.
So, Miss Lees, you talk about poorly management conflict as a reason of family business fail. What does well managed conflict actually look like around family business table?
Hmm. It's it's part of the work that I do in helping the business owners and their family members be able to focus on what is the problem and how do we develop a culture in the workplace where we learn to provide feedback, to analyze problems, to look at things objectively so we learn from it and not focus on placing blame. So we spend a lot of time on languaging. We spend a lot of time on symptom identification to problem identification to collaborative brainstorming to after action reviews to learning how to have conversations at work about work topics to create a culture not only with the family members but with obviously other members of the leadership team or the company team to have more robust, less emotional, more solution focused conversations. Those skills carry over. And so kind of going back to your previous question, Daniel, about how do you separate, conversations at work and conversations at the dinner table, it's again depends upon the family. Some families have, what happens at work, we stay at work. I have another family business right now. The husband and wife, the wife just recently joined the company. They talk about business all the time and it works for them. It works for them. They talk about it when they're driving to their son's basketball game. They talk about it at the dinner table with the kids. And so what I've introduced to this particular couple, because they have younger children, is because they do want their children to ultimately become part of the family business, then have those conversations around the dinner table. That will by default start, having some kind of osmosis process with the children. They'll start hearing and learning about the family business. But what I've shared with them also is what's important, particularly with younger children, you can start doing this very easy and it makes life easier for them going forward, is start teaching them about the values that you have developed for your company so that they have to embody the same values that you do at work that you expect of all your team members. So they can't walk in with an attitude. They can't walk in with an attitude of entitlement. They can't position themselves as somehow different or elite or whatever versus everybody else. Start talking with them about what it means and the obligation it means to do well with the family business so you provide for the other people that work for your business. There are a lot of opportunities to educate around the dinner table. So I'm not an advocate for separating, um, but you can if it's needed, and you don't have to if it's not.
And to wrap up our discussion for today, Miss Lees, you've been named a top 30 global guru alongside Simon Sinek and Mr. John Maxwell. What's a leadership truth you learned from working with family business that our corporate world gurus completely miss?
Mm, that's a good question. Um, I don't say the corporate gurus completely miss, but I am more highly attuned to group dynamics when I'm dealing with a family business than I am with, a regular corporate leadership team for exactly the reason that you just mentioned, Daniel. In a family business, these individuals are potentially going home together and are going to be having dinner together and spending the evening together, spending the weekend together. or they're going to be getting together for holidays. They're going to be seeing one another at the soccer match. They're going to be spending a lot of time together outside of work, so they don't get a break from one another. So I'm much more attuned to the family dynamics, because in non-family business situations, and it just happened on a coaching call I had before I started this conversation with you. I quite often hear things from a business owner or a leader on the company, of things before their spouse ever does, before anybody else on the team ever does. And they want to bounce it off of me before it's possibly going to impact their family. And so that opportunity quite often is not there in a family business. So I've got to watch the group dynamics to help some of those conversations come to the surface if I'm not already having a one-on-one, um, because it affects obviously the business, but it affects their home life. So it's something I pay attention to.
Very well said, Miss Lees, and congratulations. Hoping for more awards to come. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your business, your advocacy, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Sure, I would love for your listeners to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I am most active. And my handle is Liz Weber CMC. That stands for Certified Management Consultant, Liz Weber CMC on LinkedIn. Or they can also go to my website, which you've been kind to feature during this podcast, which is the acronym for my company, which is WBSLLC.com. WBSLLC.com.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Elise Weber, because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering advocacy like this to rise. So, Miss Elise, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. This has been great.
Welcome, people. See you soon. Likewise, Miss Elise.